Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
I'm Blake, 32 years old, standing in front of the Tribune building where I just won my third journalism award. My latest expose uncovered systemic abuse in a respected family. Ironic considering my own parents will only learn about my life through news articles they might stumble upon. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I faced the person who broke me all those years ago. Would I finally feel whole? Let me know where you're watching from, hit that like and subscribe button, and stick around to hear how I rebuilt myself after my family chose my abuser. Growing up in Lakeside, Maine was like living in a postcard. Our two-story colonial house sat 3 blocks from the water with a backyard that burst with my mother's prize-winning roses and the tire swing my father hung from the oak tree when I was 5. Life felt simple and secure. My father taught history at the local high school, and my mother worked as a registered nurse at Lakeside General. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough. Family dinners, weekend fishing trips, and holiday traditions formed the fabric of my childhood. I excelled in school, joined the debate team, and spent hours building model airplanes in our basement. My room was decorated with space posters and shelves of science fiction novels. I had a small group of close friends, and we rode our bikes everywhere, exploring the woods behind our neighborhood and sneaking into Mr. Wilson's orchard to steal apples in the fall. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I felt safe. That all changed when I turned 12. I remember the exact moment everything shifted. My parents sat me down in our living room one Sunday afternoon in April. The spring sun streamed through the windows, creating long shadows across the hardwood floor. Something in their expressions made my stomach knot. "Blake, there's something important we need to tell you." My father began, his voice unusually tight. He cleared his throat several times before continuing. "Before I met your mother, I was in another relationship. It ended before anything serious came of it, or at least that's what I thought." He exchanged a glance with my mother, who nodded encouragingly. "You have a half-brother named Warren. He's 20 years old." The words hung in the air like smoke. A brother, 20 years old. I sat frozen, struggling to process this information that seemed to rewrite my entire family history. "Why am I just finding out about this now?" I finally managed to ask. My mother leaned forward. "Your father didn't know about Warren until recently. His mother never told your dad she was pregnant." "Warren's mother, Diane, passed away last month from cancer," my father continued, his eyes downcast. "That's when Warren found my information in her belongings and reached out. I learned that my father had been in a brief relationship with Diane during his college years, long before he met my mother. When they broke up, Diane never told him she was pregnant. She raised Warren alone, and according to my father, never sought child support or contact. "We've invited Warren to come stay with us," my mother said gently. "He has nowhere else to go, and everyone deserves a family." I couldn't articulate the uneasiness that settled over me. It wasn't jealousy exactly, but something more primal, a sense that my carefully constructed world was about to be upended. Still, I nodded, wanting to be the good son, the understanding one. I wanted to make my parents proud. Warren arrived the following weekend. I remember standing awkwardly in our driveway as a taxi pulled up. A tall, lean man stepped out, his dark hair cropped close to his head. He looked nothing like me or my father, but there was something in the set of his jaw that seemed vaguely familiar. My father rushed forward, extending his hand awkwardly before pulling Warren into an even more awkward hug. My mother followed, her smile wide and welcoming. I hung back uncertain until my father beckoned me forward. "This is Blake, your brother," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Warren's eyes swept over me, calculating. Then his face broke into a charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Little brother," he said, extending his hand. "Nice to finally meet you." Dinner that night was tense, despite my parents' efforts to create a celebratory atmosphere. My mother had prepared her special pot roast, and my father opened an expensive bottle of wine. They peppered Warren with questions about his life, his interests, his plans for the future. I learned he had dropped out of community college, had worked various jobs, but nothing steady, and had a passion for photography that never quite materialized into anything professional. Warren was charming, self-deprecating, and attentive. He complimented my mother's cooking profusely, asked my father thoughtful questions about his teaching career, and brought up details from their phone conversations that made my parents beam. He talked about caring for his mother through her illness, his voice cracking at appropriate moments. My mother reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You're home now," she assured him. "We'll help you figure out your next steps." I watched my parents transform before my eyes, eager to embrace this stranger desperate to make up for lost time. Warren was given the guest room across from mine, and my parents spoke excitedly about helping him find a job, maybe even enrolling him in classes at the community college. That first night after everyone had gone to bed, I lay awake listening to the unfamiliar footsteps in the hallway, the sound of the bathroom door closing, water running in the pipes. Our house suddenly felt smaller, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. Looking back, I wish I'd trusted my instincts more. The uneasiness I felt wasn't childish jealousy, it was a warning. Warren maintained his charming facade around my parents, but when we were alone, I glimpsed a different person altogether. The change wasn't immediate, it was gradual, insidious, like water slowly eroding rock. It started with small things so minor that mentioning them would have made me sound petty or paranoid. 2 weeks after moving in, Warren accidentally deleted a school assignment I'd spent hours working on when he borrowed my computer. He apologized profusely when my parents were present, offering to help me redo it, playing the concerned older brother. But when they left the room, he smirked and whispered, "Maybe you should back up your files next time, genius." Another time he used the last of my special shampoo that my aunt had gifted me. When I mentioned it at breakfast, my mother frowned. "Blake, don't be selfish. Warren didn't know it was special to you." Warren adopted a wounded expression, apologizing for the misunderstanding. My father suggested I needed to learn to share. Later, Warren passed by my room and murmured, "Thanks for the shampoo, little brother. My hair looks great, doesn't it?" These incidents multiplied. Warren began tidying up my room when I wasn't home, rearranging my belongings in a way he knew would frustrate me. He would use my things without asking: my bike, my music collection, even my clothes, returning them damaged or not at all. When I complained to my parents, they dismissed it as typical sibling friction. "You've never had to share before," Blake, my mother explained. "It's an adjustment for everyone." But it wasn't just about my possessions. Warren began subtly undermining me at every turn. He'd interrupt me at dinner, talking over my stories about school. He'd contradict me on minor details, making me seem unreliable. He started referring to me as the kid or the accident when speaking to my parents, as if I were an afterthought to their real family. "I'm just teasing," he'd say when my mother would half-heartedly chide him. "Blake knows I love him. Don't you, little brother?" My father would laugh uncomfortably, and my mother would smile, relieved that the tension had broken. Neither of them seemed to notice how these interactions wore me down, how each joke chipped away at my sense of belonging in my own home. Warren's manipulations extended beyond our house. He began picking me up from school, occasionally arriving in front of my friends with an air of cool older brother. But once they were out of earshot, he'd criticize my choice of friends, my clothes, my interests. "You know they only hang out with you because your dad grades their papers right," he said once as we drove home. When I protested, he laughed. "Oh, come on. Look at you and look at them. You're not exactly in the same league." He began making comments about my appearance, pointing out my acne, my awkward growth, spurt my braces. "Just trying to help you improve," he'd say when I reacted. "That's what brothers do." Warren also started spreading rumors at my school through acquaintances he made in town. Somehow embarrassing stories about me began circulating, stories only Warren could have known or invented. When I confronted him, he denied everything, suggesting I was paranoid or that my weird behavior was the real reason people were talking. My friends started drifting away. Invitations to hangouts became less frequent. I found myself eating lunch alone more often. My grades began to slip as I struggled to concentrate in class, constantly anxious about what Warren might say or do next. At home, Warren had my parents completely charmed. He helped with yard work without being asked. He cooked dinner on nights when my mother worked late. He engaged my father in long discussions about history and politics. He even volunteered at the hospital where my mother worked, earning praise from her colleagues. "Warren is such a blessing," I overheard a neighbor tell my mother. "So mature and thoughtful for his age. You must be so proud." My mother beamed. "We are. He's had a difficult life, but he's really blossoming now that he has family support." I became increasingly isolated. When I tried to tell my parents about Warren's behavior, they attributed it to jealousy or an inability to adjust to sharing their attention. "Give it time," my father advised. "You'll become friends eventually." But Warren had no interest in friendship. His goal seemed to be my complete emotional destruction executed so skillfully that no one else could see it happening. The breaking point of this phase came when I was 13. I had spent 6 months working on a detailed model airplane for the county science fair. It was a replica of a World War II fighter plane, with working propellers and lights, the most complex project I'd ever attempted. The night before the fair, I came home from a study session at the library to find it shattered on my bedroom floor. Warren was sitting on my bed. "Tragic accident," he said, not bothering to feign remorse when we were alone. "Knocked it over while vacuuming. Weird place to leave something so fragile, don't you think?" I stared at the wreckage of hundreds of hours of work. Something inside me broke. I lunged at him, but he easily sidestepped me, laughing as I crashed into my desk. "Mom, Dad," he called out, his voice suddenly concerned. "I think Blake's having some kind of breakdown." My parents rushed in to find me sobbing on the floor amidst the broken pieces of my model. Warren stood to the side, his expression a perfect mask of brotherly concern. "I told him it was an accident," he explained as my mother tried to comfort me. I offered to help him rebuild it, but he just snapped. "Blake," my father said sternly, "accidents happen. This reaction is unacceptable." "It wasn't an accident," I insisted through tears. "He did it on purpose. He's always doing things like this." My parents exchanged worried glances. Warren sighed sadly. "I know he's upset," he told them, "but I've really been trying to connect with him. I think he's just sensitive about having to share you guys." That night, after my parents had gone to bed, Warren stopped by my room where I was still trying to salvage pieces of my model. "Word of advice, little brother," he said softly. "Don't ever try to turn them against me. They didn't want you, you know. Dad told me you were an accident. Why do you think they were so happy to find me? I'm the son they always wanted." He closed my door gently, leaving me in darkness with his poison words seeping into my heart. By the time I turned 14, Warren had been living with us for 2 years and had firmly established his position in our family. At 22, he had finally secured a job at a local marketing firm, though he continued to live at home, claiming he needed to save money. My parents not only accepted this arrangement but encouraged it, happy to keep their newfound son close. What they didn't see was how Warren's behavior toward me had escalated from psychological manipulation to physical intimidation and abuse. It began with accidental physical contact, a shove while passing in the hallway, a door unintentionally closed on my fingers, a foot extended to trip me when no one was looking. Each incident was plausibly deniable if I complained. "Blake is making up stories again," Warren would tell my parents with a concerned frown. "I'm worried about him." The first deliberate act of physical violence happened after I scored higher than Warren on an IQ test. My father had brought home from school as a fun family activity. Warren had bragged about his intelligence all evening. Sure, he would outperform everyone. When the results showed I had the highest score, he maintained his composure until my parents went to bed. Later that night, he cornered me in the bathroom, grabbing my arm and twisting until tears sprang to my eyes. "Listen carefully," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. "If you ever make me look bad in front of them again, I'll hurt you in ways that won't show. Understand?" I nodded, too terrified to speak. When he released me, there were finger-shaped bruises on my arm that I carefully hid under long-sleeved shirts for the next week. The incidents multiplied and intensified. Warren discovered he could hurt me in the swimming pool, where bruises could be attributed to roughhousing or accidents. He would hold me underwater just long enough for panic to set in, releasing me with a laugh when I came up gasping. "Just playing around," he would say if anyone noticed. "Blake needs to toughen up." He began entering my room while I slept, standing over my bed until I woke up, then leaving without a word, a tactic designed to make me feel perpetually unsafe in my own space. I started propping a chair against my doorknob, which my parents discovered and confiscated, concerned about fire safety. Warren also established a system of control through household chores. He convinced my parents that I needed more responsibility, then privately told me I would be doing his assigned chores as well as my own. "If you don't, I'll break something you care about," he threatened. "Or maybe I'll tell Mom and Dad about those websites you visit." This was a lie. I hadn't visited anything inappropriate, but I knew they would believe him over me. I became his personal servant, cleaning his room, doing his laundry, completing his share of yard work. If I refused or complained, he would create situations that got me in trouble with my parents, misplacing important mail, breaking something valuable, and planting evidence in my room or simply lying about my behavior when they weren't home. My life became a carefully choreographed dance of appeasement and avoidance. I began spending as much time away from home as possible at the library, at school activities, at the few friends' houses where I was still welcome. But Warren found ways to isolate me further, spreading rumors that I was having emotional problems, that my parents were concerned about my behavior. When I tried to tell my English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, about what was happening, she listened sympathetically but seemed skeptical. "Warren volunteers at the senior center where my mother lives," she told me. "He's so patient and kind with the residents. Are you sure you're not misinterpreting things? Siblings can be rough with each other." What Mrs. Patterson didn't understand was that Warren had deliberately cultivated relationships with authority figures in our community. Teachers, parents of my friends, our neighbors, precisely so that any accusations I made would seem implausible. My grades continued to plummet. I developed insomnia, jumping at the slightest sounds in the night. I lost weight as my appetite diminished. My once outgoing personality retreated behind a wall of silence and avoidance. My parents noticed these changes but attributed them to adolescence. They arranged for me to see a counselor, but Warren had thought of that too. "Blake has been making up some pretty wild stories," he told them privately, which they repeated to the counselor before my first session. "I think he might need serious help." The counselor, primed to see me as troubled and potentially dishonest, interpreted my reluctance to open up as confirmation of Warren's assessment rather than fear of not being believed. The most severe incident occurred shortly after my 15th birthday. My aunt had sent me a check for $50, which I had hidden in my desk drawer, planning to use it to buy a new lock for my bedroom door. Warren found it while searching my room during school hours. When I discovered the money missing and confronted him, he denied taking it. That night, he followed me into the basement, where I had gone to work on homework away from his presence. Looking for this, he taunted, holding up the $50 bill. When I reached for it, he grabbed my arm, spinning me around and shoving me hard against the concrete wall. My head struck the surface with enough force to make my vision blur. "You don't deserve nice things," he hissed, pocketing the money. "You don't deserve anything." When I tried to push past him, he grabbed me by the throat, applying just enough pressure to make breathing difficult, but not enough to leave marks. "If you tell anyone, I'll say you attacked me for money to buy drugs," he threatened. "Who do you think they'll believe? The honor student with the volunteer award, or the kid whose grades are circling the drain?" He pushed me down the last few steps into the basement. I lost my balance and fell awkwardly, my arm twisted beneath me. The sharp crack and immediate pain told me something was broken before I even had time to scream. Warren's face registered brief panic before settling into a mask of concern. By the time my parents rushed downstairs, he was kneeling beside me, seemingly trying to help. "He tripped on the stairs," Warren explained as my father carefully helped me up. I tried to catch him, but I wasn't quick enough. At the hospital, the doctor noted that my injury was consistent with a fall. No one questioned Warren's version of events, not even when I tried to tell the nurse what really happened while my parents were filling out paperwork. "Family matters are complicated," she said, gently patting my uninjured arm, "but accidents happen, especially with teenage boys." That night, with my arm in a cast, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a profound sense of hopelessness washing over me. No one believed me. No one saw Warren for what he truly was. And there seemed to be nothing I could do to change that. I was trapped in a house with someone who wanted to destroy me, protected by parents who couldn't or wouldn't see the truth. By 17, I had developed a strategy for survival. I realized no one would rescue me. I had to rescue myself. The broken arm incident had taught me a bitter lesson. Direct confrontation was dangerous and ineffective. Instead, I needed to play the long game. I began rebuilding my academic record, staying at school late to use the computers for homework, since Warren often accidentally deleted my assignments at home. I joined clubs that kept me away from the house as much as possible. Debate team, newspaper, anything with meetings and events that provided legitimate reasons to be absent. I secured a part-time job at the local bookstore, telling my parents the money was for college applications. In reality, I was saving every penny for escape. I opened a bank account my parents didn't know about, using the address of my one remaining close friend Darren for statements. I researched colleges far from Maine, focusing on those offering substantial scholarships. Warren grew suspicious of my extended absences, but couldn't openly object without revealing his true motives to my parents. Instead, he increased his psychological warfare, leaving threatening notes in my backpack, whispering promises of retribution when we passed in hallways, accidentally damaging my most valued possessions. "Planning something, little brother?" he asked one evening, cornering me in the kitchen. "Just remember, you're nothing without this family. No one else will ever want you around." I had learned to mask my emotions around Warren to show neither fear nor defiance. I simply shrugged and moved past him, careful not to turn my back for too long. My 18th birthday approached with a sense of urgency. Once legally an adult, I could leave without my parents having the right to force me back. I had already been accepted to 3 universities, all at least 500 miles away. I chose Northwestern University in Chicago, which had offered me a partial journalism scholarship far enough that visits home would be impractical. 2 months before graduation, Warren discovered my college acceptance letters while searching my room. I returned from work to find him sitting on my bed, the opened envelope spread around him. "Chicago," he sneered. "You think you're actually going to escape to Chicago?" "It's a good school," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I earned that scholarship." Warren stood moving toward me with the deliberate slowness of a predator. "You're not going anywhere. I'll make sure of that." By doing what I challenged, surprising myself with my boldness, breaking my other arm, "Go ahead. It'll just prove everything I've been saying about you." Something dark flickered in his eyes. "There are ways to stop you that won't leave a mark," he said softly. "Maybe something happens to your precious scholarship. Maybe the university receives an anonymous tip about plagiarism or drug use." The threat was plausible enough to send a chill through me. Warren had connections at my school through his volunteer work. He could potentially damage my reputation or academic standing. Or maybe he continued, "I just tell Mom and Dad how worried I am about your mental state, how you've been making dangerous plans, talking about running away, showing signs of instability." I realized with sickening clarity that Warren didn't just want to torment me, he wanted to trap me. My escape represented a loss of control he couldn't tolerate. "Why do you care?" I asked. "Wouldn't you be happier with me gone?" Warren's smile was cold. "And miss all our quality time. Besides, who would I blame when things go missing or get broken? Who would do my chores while I get all the credit for being the perfect son?" I felt a surge of rage unlike anything I'd experienced before. 5 years of fear and helplessness crystallized into a single moment of clarity. I would never be safe as long as Warren had access to me. The confrontation in my bedroom might have ended there with threats and counter-threats if my father hadn't called up the stairs that dinner was ready. Warren brushed past me, deliberately shoving my shoulder. "This isn't over," he murmured. That night I finalized my escape plan. I would graduate in 6 weeks. The weekend after, while my parents attended a wedding out of state, I would pack my essential belongings and leave. I had enough savings for a security deposit on a small apartment in Chicago. I could work full-time over the summer, then start classes in the fall. But Warren had other plans. The next day, I returned from school to find him waiting in the garage. He had discovered my bank statements in my desk drawer, evidence of my secret financial preparations. "Quite the little nest egg," he said, holding up the papers. "Almost $4,000. Planning a vacation." "Give those back," I demanded, reaching for the statements. Warren pulled them away, his other hand shooting out to grip my shirt collar. "I think I deserve a going-away present, don't you, for all the brotherly guidance I've provided?" What happened next occurred in a blur of motion and adrenaline. Warren attempted to force me against the wall as he had done countless times before. But I was no longer the frightened 12-year-old he had first terrorized. I had grown taller, stronger, fueled by years of suppressed rage. I blocked his arm and pushed back. Warren, surprised by the resistance, stumbled backward into my father's workbench. Tools clattered to the floor. Warren's surprise turned to fury. He lunged forward, swinging wildly. I ducked, but his fist caught my cheekbone, sending an explosion of pain through my face. I tasted blood. Warren pressed his advantage, grabbing me by the throat and slamming me against the garage door. My vision darkened at the edges as his grip tightened. "I should have done this years ago," he snarled. In desperation, I brought my knee up hard, connecting with his groin. Warren doubled over, releasing me. I gasped for air, my lungs burning. The garage door opened suddenly. My mother stood there, groceries in hand, her expression shifting from surprise to horror as she took in the scene. Warren crumpled on the floor, me with blood streaming from my split cheek, both of us breathing heavily. "What is happening here?" she demanded, dropping her bags. Warren recovered quickly, years of practice enabling him to shift into victim mode. "Blake attacked me," he gasped. "I found his bank statements. He's been hiding money, planning something. When I asked him about it, he just snapped." For once, the evidence contradicted Warren's story. My injuries were clearly defensive, his were not. The scattered tools told a story of a violent struggle. Most importantly, my mother had witnessed the tail end of the confrontation with her own eyes. "Blake," she asked, her voice uncertain. 5 years of suppressed truth poured out of me in a torrent. I told her everything, the psychological torture, the physical abuse, the threats, the gaslighting. I showed her the bruises on my throat already darkening. I explained my escape plan, my desperate bid for freedom from Warren's tyranny. My mother listened in stunned silence. When my father arrived home minutes later, the scene in the garage had evolved into a family crisis. An ambulance was called. I was taken to the hospital with a concussion, facial lacerations, and throat contusions. This time, the medical staff asked questions that couldn't be explained away by accidents or clumsiness. A social worker interviewed me privately. Police were called. Warren was removed from our home that night, ordered to stay away pending an investigation. My parents, faced with evidence they could no longer ignore, were shattered. My mother alternated between tearful apologies and stunned disbelief. My father retreated into a shell of guilt and shame. For the first time in 5 years, I slept without fear. The weeks that followed were a painful period of healing physically and emotionally. Family therapy sessions revealed the extent of Warren's manipulation and my parents' willful blindness. Protective orders were filed. Warren was charged with assault, ultimately accepting a plea deal that included probation and mandatory counseling. I graduated high school with my face still healing, but my spirit lighter than it had been in years. I moved to Chicago as planned, beginning my new life at Northwestern with a sense of cautious optimism. In my freshman dormitory, I slowly learned to trust again, to form friendships without constant fear of betrayal. Away from Warren's influence, I thrived academically and socially. I joined the university newspaper, discovering a talent and passion for investigative journalism. I sought therapy, beginning the long process of understanding and processing the trauma of my adolescence. For 3 years, I maintained minimal contact with my parents, holiday phone calls, occasional emails, as I established my independence, and they worked through their own guilt and complicity. The distance helped us all heal. I began to believe that perhaps the worst was behind us. I was wrong. During my junior year of college winter break, approached with the usual mix of anticipation and anxiety that accompanied thoughts of home. I hadn't been back to Maine since leaving for Northwestern, claiming internship opportunities and summer classes as excuses to stay in Chicago. My parents had visited me once during freshman year, an awkward weekend of forced conversation and painful silences, but financial constraints and my father's teaching schedule had prevented subsequent trips. This year would be different, I decided. 3 years of distance and therapy had given me perspective. My parents had made mistakes, catastrophic ones, but they had also been victims of Warren's manipulation. Perhaps it was time to rebuild our relationship on new, healthier terms. I called my mother in November to announce my plans to visit for Christmas. Her initial delight quickly gave way to an uncomfortable pause. "That's wonderful, Blake," she said finally. "But there's something you should know before you make travel arrangements." I felt a familiar knot form in my stomach as she continued. "Warren has moved back in with us." "Just temporarily," she added hastily. "He lost his apartment in Portland and needed a place to stay while he gets back on his feet." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Warren is living with you," I repeated, unable to process what I was hearing. "After everything he did..." My mother's voice took on a defensive edge. "It's been 3 years, Blake. People change. Warren has been through extensive therapy. He's on medication now for his anger issues. He's genuinely remorseful for his behavior." "Remorseful," I echoed hollowly. "Mom, he terrorized me for 5 years. He put me in the hospital." "And that was inexcusable," she acknowledged. "But he's family too. He had a difficult childhood with Diane. He never had proper guidance or support until he found us. The therapist helped us understand that his behavior, while terrible, came from a place of profound insecurity and abandonment issues. I listened in stunned silence as my mother explained how Warren had reconnected with them 6 months earlier after completing an intensive outpatient program for behavioral issues. He had apologized, profusely taken full responsibility for his actions, and asked for a chance to make amends. "He's not the same person, Blake," my mother insisted. "He's working as a counselor at a youth center now helping troubled teens. He volunteers at the hospital with me. Everyone comments on what a compassionate patient man he is." The familiar narrative made my blood run cold. Warren was playing the same game, using the same tactics, presenting a perfect public image while hiding his true nature. Only now he had the added advantage of a redemption story. "Does he know I'm planning to visit?" I asked. "Yes," my mother admitted. "He actually suggested we invite you. He wants to apologize in person." Against every instinct screaming at me to stay away, I decided to go home. I needed to see for myself what was happening to make my parents understand the danger they had invited back into their lives. I arrived in Maine 4 days before Christmas. The house looked exactly as I remembered it, down to the wreath on the front door and the string of colored lights along the eaves. My father greeted me with an awkward hug, my mother with tears and a tighter embrace. Warren was conveniently absent at work, according to my mother. That evening, as we sat in the living room catching up, I tried to explain my concerns. "I understand the concept of forgiveness," I said carefully, "but Warren isn't just someone who made mistakes. He's manipulative and dangerous. Whatever he's told you, whatever performance he's putting on, you need to be careful." My father frowned. "Blake, we're not naive. We've been cautious. Warren has been living here for 4 months now, and he's been nothing but respectful and helpful." "Of course he has," I replied. "That's how he operates. He's always charming and perfect around others. It's when no one's watching that the mask comes off." My mother reached for my hand. "Sweetie, I know this is difficult. What Warren did to you was unforgivable. But people can change with proper help." The therapist said. "The therapist doesn't know Warren like I do," I interrupted. "No one does." The conversation deteriorated from there. My parents became increasingly defensive, interpreting my warnings as an unwillingness to allow for redemption or growth. They cited Warren's volunteer work, his steady job, his apparent remorse, as evidence of transformation. "He takes full responsibility for his actions," my father insisted. "He doesn't make excuses or blame you anymore." "How generous of him," I replied bitterly. My mother's expression hardened slightly. "We're not asking you to forget what happened. We're just asking you to consider that Warren has worked hard to change. Everyone deserves a second chance, Blake." "He had 5 years of chances," I said. 5 years of hurting me while you looked the other way." The words hung in the air between us. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father's face flushed with anger and shame. "That's not fair," he said quietly. "We've acknowledged our failure to protect you. We've apologized countless times. We've been in therapy too, trying to understand how we could have been so blind. But we can't change the past. We can only try to move forward." Before I could respond, the front door opened. Warren stepped into the entryway, stomping snow from his boots. He looked older, his face, leaner hair beginning to recede slightly at the temples. He wore a respectable wool coat and carried a briefcase, the perfect image of a young professional. Our eyes met, and for a fraction of a second I glimpsed the real Warren behind the facade, calculating, cold, triumphant. Then his expression shifted to one of humble contrition. "Blake," he said softly, "it's good to see you." My parents watched expectantly, clearly hoping for some gesture of reconciliation. I remained seated, hands clenched in my lap. Warren approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. "I know words aren't enough," he said, his voice steady. "What I did was inexcusable. I was sick, but that's not an excuse. I've worked hard to become a better person, to understand why I behaved the way I did, and to make sure I never hurt anyone like that again." The performance was flawless, the perfect mix of accountability and redemptive narrative. My parents watched with approving expressions, nodding slightly at his practiced words. "I don't expect forgiveness," Warren continued. "I just want you to know how deeply sorry I am, and that I'm committed to making amends however I can." When I didn't respond, my mother intervened. "Blake Warren has prepared the guest room for you. He thought you might be more comfortable there than in your old room." The implication was clear. Warren was now in my childhood bedroom. He had literally taken my place. "I'll stay at a hotel," I said flatly. My parents protested, but I was adamant. I couldn't sleep under the same roof as Warren couldn't pretend we were one big happy family working through issues. As I stood to leave, Warren stepped closer, extending his hand, as if for a conciliatory handshake. I stared at his outstretched hand until he lowered it awkwardly. As he turned to my parents with a sad, understanding smile, he whispered words only I could hear. "I always win, little brother." In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that Warren hadn't changed at all. The therapy, the medication, the volunteer work, it was all part of an elaborate performance designed to regain access to my parents and their home. Whatever his ultimate goal, it wasn't healing or reconciliation, it was victory and control. I left without shaking his hand. At the hotel that night, I called my parents, making one final attempt to make them understand. "He hasn't changed," I insisted. "He's playing you just like he always has." My mother sighed. "Blake, I know this is hard, but you're letting your past trauma cloud your judgment. The Warren we've seen these past months isn't the same person who hurt you." "Because he doesn't need to hurt me anymore," I explained desperately. "He's already won. He has you the house, my room, everything he wanted." "It's not a competition," my father said. "There's room in our lives for both of you." "Not for me," I replied. "Not while he's there. I can't be part of this delusion." My mother's voice hardened. "So it's an ultimatum, him or you." "It's a boundary," I corrected. "I won't put myself in danger again, and I won't watch you be manipulated by someone who nearly destroyed me." The conversation ended in stalemate. I checked out of the hotel the next morning and took the first flight back to Chicago, leaving my Christmas gifts unopened under my parents' tree. Before leaving Maine, I sent them a final email explaining my decision. "I love you both," I wrote, "but I cannot and will not have any relationship with Warren, and I cannot maintain a relationship with anyone who chooses to keep him in their lives. This isn't about forgiveness or holding grudges. It's about safety and self-preservation. When you're ready to see the truth, I'll be here. Until then, please don't contact me." I blocked their numbers, filtered their emails to a folder I wouldn't see, and severed all social media connections. The finality of it felt both devastating and liberating. I had lost my family twice, once to Warren's abuse, and now to their willful blindness. Back in Chicago, I threw myself into my studies and work at the university paper, channeling my pain and anger into investigative pieces about systems that fail to protect victims. I spent that Christmas alone in my apartment, alternating between grief and determination. I had escaped Warren once by leaving home. Now I would escape the shadow he cast over my life by building something new, something entirely my own. The years following my final break with my family were both the hardest and most transformative of my life. Without the safety net of family, even a damaged one, I had to create my own foundation, my own support system, my own definition of home. I graduated from Northwestern with honors and a job offer from the Chicago Tribune as a junior reporter. My investigative piece on campus sexual assault cover-ups had caught the attention of a veteran editor who saw potential in my meticulous research and empathetic interview style. I started in the city beat, covering local politics and community issues, working long hours for modest pay, but building a reputation for thorough, nuanced reporting. My apartment was a studio in Rogers Park, small, but mine paid for with money I had earned. I furnished it piece by piece from thrift stores and sidewalk finds, taking satisfaction in creating a space where I felt completely safe. I installed 3 locks on the door, a security measure that my few visitors found excessive but that allowed me to sleep soundly. Building relationships remained challenging. Years of Warren's abuse had left me hypervigilant, quick to perceive threats in innocent interactions. I mistook kindness for manipulation, boundaries for rejection. Dating was a minefield of triggers and misunderstandings. Friendships developed slowly, tested by my tendency to withdraw when people got too close. 2 years into my career at the Tribune, I was assigned to cover a series of community forums on domestic violence. During one session, I met Sandra, a family therapist specializing in trauma recovery. Something about her direct, no-nonsense approach cut through my usual defenses. When she mentioned a support group for adult survivors of family abuse, I found myself agreeing to attend. That weekly group became my anchor. Surrounded by others who understood the complex grief of family betrayal, I began to articulate experiences I had previously buried. I learned that healing wasn't linear, that anger and mourning could coexist with growth and joy, that vulnerability wasn't the same as weakness. My career advanced as I channeled my personal understanding of trauma and recovery into my reporting. I developed a specialty in stories about systemic failures in protection systems, child welfare, domestic violence response, victim advocacy. My three-part series on failures in restraining order enforcement won a regional journalism award and prompted policy changes in the Chicago Police Department. Throughout these years, my parents attempted to re-establish contact. Birthday cards arrived at my office address, which I had never given them. Warren's doing no doubt a reminder that he could find me if he wanted to. Holiday voicemails accumulated in a folder I rarely accessed. Each message followed a similar pattern, expressions of love and concern, updates about their lives, always including Warren's latest achievements, invitations to reconcile on their terms. I never responded. There were moments of weakness, usually late at night or during holidays, when I would find my finger hovering over their number in my phone. The desire for family for the parents I had before Warren would become almost overwhelming. But then I would remember the look in Warren's eyes in our final encounter, the whispered threat, and resolve would return. 5 years after our estrangement, I received an invitation to my father's retirement party. The envelope contained a handwritten note. "Warren will be out of town that weekend. Please come. We miss you." I considered it briefly before feeding the invitation into my paper shredder. 6 years out, my mother called my editor in desperation, after months of unanswered messages claiming a family emergency. When I returned the call from a blocked number prepared for news of illness or death, she admitted there was no emergency. She had simply hoped to hear my voice. The manipulation, however well-intentioned, confirmed I had made the right decision in maintaining distance. 7 years after cutting contact, I won my first national award for a series exposing a network of unlicensed group homes where children had suffered years of documented abuse while state agencies failed to intervene. The investigation had taken 18 months, involving dozens of interviews with survivors and thousands of pages of documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests. At the award ceremony in New York, I scanned the audience reflexively, half expecting to see my parents, despite not having invited them. They weren't there, of course, but I later discovered they had watched the live stream. My mother sent a congratulatory email that managed to both express pride in my achievement and subtly chastise me for my continued absence. Warren watched too. He said, "Your speech was powerful. He's always believed in your talent." The mention of Warren still had the power to turn my stomach, but less so than before. He was becoming abstract in my mind, a malevolent force rather than a flesh-and-blood threat. My therapist suggested this was progress, a sign that he no longer occupied the center of my emotional universe. As my professional reputation grew, so did my personal support network. Sandra from the support group became a close friend, and eventually a godmother to my daughter Eliza, born 8 years after I left Maine. Eliza's mother, Catherine, was an emergency room doctor I had met while researching a story on hospital responses to domestic violence. Our relationship developed slowly, built on a foundation of radical honesty about our pasts and careful attention to each other's boundaries. Catherine had her own history of family dysfunction, though different from mine. She understood my hypervigilance around Eliza's safety, my insistence on background checks for babysitters, my panic when school pickup was even 5 minutes late. Together we worked to create the secure family environment neither of us had experienced consistently as children. When Catherine proposed after 3 years together, she did so with a promise. "Your past doesn't scare me. Your boundaries don't frustrate me. I'm not trying to fix you. I'm committed to growing with you." We married in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens, surrounded by friends who had become family. No blood relatives attended. Catherine's parents had died years earlier. Mine remained behind the wall I had built to protect myself from Warren's influence. The Chicago Tribune promoted me to senior investigative reporter, allowing me to select my own projects and mentor younger journalists. I chose to focus on stories that gave voice to those who had been silenced by systems designed to protect the powerful rather than the vulnerable. My second national award came for an investigation into how family courts frequently awarded custody to documented abusers due to systemic biases and insufficient training in trauma dynamics. The piece featured anonymous interviews with judges, social workers, and victims, exposing the gap between legal theory and harmful practice. After the article's publication, I received an email from my father, the first direct communication in years that didn't attempt to persuade me to reconcile. Instead, he simply wrote, "I see what you're doing. I understand why now. I'm sorry I didn't listen when it mattered most." I read the message several times but never replied. Some bridges once burned cannot and should not be rebuilt. As my 10th year of estrangement approached, I learned through a former high school classmate that Warren had been arrested for financial misconduct at the youth center where he worked. According to local news reports, he had embezzled nearly $200,000 over several years, using his position of trust to access accounts meant for programming. The investigation had uncovered evidence that he had similarly defrauded 2 previous employers. The news brought no satisfaction, only a grim validation of what I had always known. Warren's rehabilitation had been another performance, another mask, concealing his true nature. I wondered how my parents were coping with this evidence that their faith in him had been misplaced, whether they were finally seeing what I had tried to show them a decade earlier. I didn't reach out to find out. Whatever reckoning they were having with reality was their journey now, not mine. I had built my life without them brick by careful brick. I had found purpose in my work, love in my marriage, joy in my daughter, and healing in my chosen community. At 32, standing in front of the Tribune building after winning my 3rd major award, I sometimes wondered what would happen if I came face to face with Warren again. Would I still feel fear, rage? Or would I simply see a pathetic man whose power over me had been entirely severed by my refusal to remain his victim? I hoped never to find out. The life I had built was too precious to risk contamination by the poison of the past. My parents would continue to see glimpses of me through news articles and professional achievements. Warren would know I had succeeded despite his best efforts to destroy me. And I would continue forward telling stories that mattered, giving voice to the voiceless, and creating the safe home I had always deserved. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was in the middle of editing the final draft of an investigative piece on witness intimidation when my assistant informed me that a Dr. Morris from Lakeside General in Maine was on the line. My father had suffered a major heart attack. Time seemed to suspend itself as Dr. Morris explained the situation. My father was stable but in critical condition. The prognosis was uncertain. He had asked for me before they sedated him for a procedure. "Would you like us to tell him you're coming?" the doctor asked gently. The question hung in the air between us, loaded with a decade of history and pain. I thought of all the milestones my father had missed: my wedding, Eliza's birth, her first steps, her first words. I thought of the years of silence, of unanswered boundaries, of choosing Warren over my safety. I also thought of my father's face the last time I saw him, the confusion, the hurt, the stubborn belief that he could have both sons in his life without consequences. Had a decade provided the clarity that my words could not? "I'll be there tomorrow," I finally replied. "But I have one condition. Warren cannot be present at the hospital during my visit." Dr. Morris seemed to understand immediately. "I'll make a note in your father's file. The hospital can enforce visitor restrictions for patient welfare." I hung up and sat motionless at my desk, waiting for the familiar surge of anxiety that accompanied any thought of returning to Maine. It came, but muted, manageable. 10 years of therapy, of building a secure life, of processing my trauma, had given me tools I didn't have during my last attempt to return home. Catherine supported my decision without reservation. "You're not going for them," she reminded me as I packed an overnight bag. "You're going for you to say whatever you need to say." Eliza, now 7, wrapped her arms around my legs. "Tell Grandpa I hope he feels better," she said. She knew of my parents only through carefully edited stories of my childhood, the complicated truth waiting for when she was old enough to understand. The flight to Portland felt like traveling backward in time. Each mile closer to Lakeside contracted my chest, a little more awakened old vigilance patterns. I rented a car at the airport, driving the familiar route to the hospital where my mother had once worked, where Warren had once volunteered to build his facade of benevolence. Security met me at the hospital entrance, another precaution arranged by Dr. Morris. The staff had been briefed. Warren's photo was at the reception desk. I felt simultaneously grateful for the protection and ashamed at needing it even now. My father looked small in the hospital bed, diminished by illness and age, in a way I wasn't prepared for, His hair had gone completely white, his face mapped with lines I didn't recognize. Monitors beeped steadily beside him, IV lines snaking into his arms. My mother sat beside him, her back to the door. She turned at the sound of my footsteps, her expression transforming from exhaustion to disbelief to cautious joy. "Blake," she whispered, rising unsteadily. "You came." I nodded, maintaining distance. "How is he?" "Stable. The procedure went well, but there was significant damage." Her eyes never left my face, drinking in the changes a decade had wrought. "You look good, healthy." I confirmed. "Is Warren here?" Her expression tightened slightly. "No, he's at the house. I told him you were coming." "And?" She sighed, shoulders slumping. "And he left. Said he'd stay with a friend until you're gone." Whether this was respect for my boundary or simply tactical retreat, I couldn't know. Either way, his absence allowed me to approach my father's bedside. My father's eyes fluttered open as I sat in the chair my mother vacated. Recognition dawned slowly, then fully. His hand reached for mine with surprising strength. "Blake," he whispered, voice raspy from intubation. "My boy." Something in his gaze was different, a clarity I hadn't seen during our last encounter, an absence of the defensive shield that had always risen when Warren was discussed. "He's gone," my father said, seeming to read my thoughts. "Left 6 months ago after the arrest." My mother made a small, distressed sound from the corner of the room. I was wrong. My father continued each word clearly, an effort. "So wrong. About everything. About him. About what he did to you." I sat very still, absorbing words I had once desperately needed to hear, words that came a decade too late. "The investigators found things," he continued. "In his room. In our house. Evidence of other manipulations. Other victims." He closed his eyes briefly, pain crossing his features that had nothing to do with his heart. "He kept trophies, journals, detailed accounts of what he did to you, how he planned it, how he enjoyed it." My mother was crying silently now, hands pressed to her mouth. I realized with a strange detachment that this was the first time they had ever acknowledged the full reality of what Warren had done, not as mistakes or misunderstandings or symptoms of mental illness, but as deliberate, calculated cruelty. "I don't expect forgiveness," my father said, echoing Warren's words from our last meeting, but with genuine remorse rather than performance. "But I need you to know that I understand now. I see what I refused to see then." I sat with him for hours as he drifted in and out of sleep. We talked little, there was too much to say, and too much that could never be undone. My mother kept her distance, sensing perhaps that her continued defense of Warren, until the evidence became incontrovertible, had damaged our relationship beyond what this single visit could repair. As evening approached, I prepared to leave for my hotel. "Will you come back tomorrow?" my father asked, vulnerability naked in his voice. "Yes," I promised. "But not to reconnect or rebuild, to make peace with what happened and then continue my life." He nodded, understanding the boundary. "You have a family now, children." I showed him a photo of Catherine and Eliza. He studied it with tears gathering in his eyes, but didn't ask to meet them, recognizing that some privileges were permanently forfeited by his past choices. Back at my hotel, I called Catherine, the sound of her voice, and Eliza's chatter in the background, centering me, reminding me where home truly was. The next day, I returned to the hospital for a final visit. My father was stronger, sitting up slightly. My mother was absent, giving us space. "I want you to know something," I told him. "I'm not here because I've been carrying this wound around for 10 years, unable to move on. I'm here because I've built a life strong enough to withstand revisiting the past without being destroyed by it." My father nodded slowly. "I see that strength in you. I always did, even when I failed to protect it." We talked about my work, my investigations into systems that fail vulnerable people. He told me he had followed my career through articles online, had kept a file of my publications, had watched from afar, as I transformed my trauma into purpose. "You're doing important work," he said. "Giving voice to people who aren't heard. Like you weren't heard." It was the most complete understanding he had ever shown of my experience and my choices. When it was time to leave, I shook his hand formally, a gesture that acknowledged our biological connection while respecting the boundaries of our relationship. "I don't hate you," I told him, the closest I could come to absolution. "I stopped hating you years ago. It took too much energy that I needed for healing. His eyes filled with tears. That's more than I deserve. As I turned to go, he called after me. Blake Warren doesn't know where you are now. I made sure of that. The things he kept, the plans he had, they're all with the police. He won't hurt anyone else. It was a small offering, but perhaps the most meaningful he could make, a belated attempt to protect me when protection still mattered. I left Maine the next morning and returned to Chicago to Catherine and Eliza, to my chosen family, and the life I had built from the ashes of what Warren had tried to destroy. I didn't look back. 2 weeks later, I published my most personal investigation yet, a detailed examination of how family systems enable and protect abusers through denial, minimization, and misplaced loyalty. I interviewed psychologists, family court judges, adult survivors, and parents who had failed to protect their children. I did not include my own story explicitly, but its influence was evident in every carefully chosen question, every compassionate analysis. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from readers who recognized their own experiences in the article, who felt validated, and seen, who found courage to establish boundaries or seek help. The piece was picked up by national outlets, sparking discussions about family accountability and the insidious nature of psychological abuse. My editor called it career-defining work. Catherine recognized it for what it truly was: the final transformation of my personal pain into public purpose, the reclamation of my narrative on my own terms. The profound lesson I learned through this journey wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It wasn't even about the importance of being believed, though that matters deeply. It was about the power of defining family, not by blood or obligation, but by safety, respect, and love, freely given. True family protects you from harm rather than inviting it into your home. True family respects your boundaries rather than dismissing them as inconvenient. True family believes you when you speak your truth, especially when that truth is difficult to hear. I built such a family piece by careful piece. I created the safe home I had been denied as a child. I found work that matters, love that heals, and purpose that transcends trauma. Some wounds never fully heal. They simply become part of who you are, informing your compassion and your caution in equal measure. Some relationships cannot and should not be salvaged, not because grudges are worth holding, but because safety is worth protecting. The freedom I found wasn't in forgiveness or reconciliation. It was in the courage to choose myself, to define my own worth, separate from those who had failed me, to build a life where I would never again be silenced or dismissed or harmed by those who claimed to love me. That is the legacy I will pass to my daughter, the truth at the heart of every story I tell. You are worthy of safety. You deserve to be believed. And sometimes the bravest, most healing thing you can do is walk away from those who cannot or will not protect you, no matter what claims of family or blood they invoke. Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to cut contact with family for your own well-being? What boundaries have you established to protect your peace? Share your experiences in the comments, and if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their safety matters more than family obligation. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the family we choose brings more healing than the family we're born into.